The jazz club's air was thick with cigarette smoke and secrets, the kind that clung to your skin like damp velvet. 5 women sat at a table near the stage, their laughter brittle, their glances sharp as broken glass. They were strangers to the world, but to each other, they were a lifeline and a risk that could unravel everything. In the heart of 1980s New York, where neon lights bled into the night and conformity choked the air, the Sapphire Lounge was a sanctuary for those who dared to feel too much. Emma, 34, with her practical pixie cut and a smile that hid a storm, sipped her gin and tonic, her wedding ring glinting like a warning. Across from her, Rachel, 42, her long wavy hair falling over one shoulder, traced the rim of her glass, her eyes flickering toward the stage where a singer named Lila was about to perform. Lila's voice, they'd heard, could crack open your soul. Next to Rachel sat Claire, 39, her sleek bob framing a face that carried the weight of a double life. She adjusted her scarf, a nervous habit, her fingers brushing against Sophie's, who was 36, with curls that seemed to defy gravity and a laugh that could charm anyone except her husband. At the end of the table, Miah, 45, the quiet one with a gaze that saw too much, clutched her purse, her knuckles white. They were all married, all mothers, all bound by vows they'd begun to question in whispers, late at night, when the world wasn't watching. They'd met by Chancellor Fatih, a women's book club 6 months ago, a cover for their real purpose, to share the truths they couldn't say aloud. The Sapphire Lounge was their rebellion, their one night a month to be free, to be themselves. But tonight felt different. Lila, the enigmatic singer with a voice like honey and heartbreak, was rumored to sing a song that could change everything. A song called Unveiled, written for women like them. As the lights dimmed, Emma leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. They say she wrote it for someone she loved, someone she couldn't have. Rachel's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her glass. Claire's scarf slipped, revealing a faint bruise on her neck, a mark her husband had left, not out of love, but control. Sophie's laugh faltered, and Maria's eyes glistened, reflecting the stage's amber glow. Lila stepped into the spotlight, her silhouette soft but commanding. She was in her late 20s, with dark eyes that seemed to see through walls, through lies. Her voice began low, a murmur that grew into a melody that wrapped around the room like a confession. Unveiled wasn't just a song, it was a mirror, reflecting every hidden desire, every buried truth. The lyrics spoke of love that dared not speak its name, of hearts caged by fear, of a longing so fierce it could burn down the world. Emma felt her chest tighten. She thought of her husband, Mark, waiting at home, oblivious to the part of her that ached for Rachel's touch. Rachel, who sat so close their knees brushed under the table, had a husband who preached fidelity while straying himself. Claire's fingers trembled as she remembered the nights she'd spent writing letters to Sophie, letters she'd burned before anyone could find them. Sophie, whose husband barely noticed her anymore, felt her heart race as Lila's voice climbed, each note a dare to feel alive. Miah, the oldest, thought of the daughter she'd raised to be brave, and the secret she'd kept even from her. The song built to a crescendo, and the women felt exposed, as if Lila had peeled back their skin to reveal the raw, beating truth beneath. They weren't just 5 married women in a jazz club. They were a chorus of longing, a symphony of courage and fear, bound by a melody that named what they could not. When the last note faded, the room was silent, save for the clink of glasses and the soft sob Rachel couldn't stifle. Emma reached for her hand under the table, a reckless act in a room full of strangers. Claire's scarf fell completely, and she didn't bother to pick it up. Sophie's eyes met Lila's across the room, and for a moment, It felt like the singers saw them really saw them. Maria whispered, "We can't keep doing this." But her voice lacked conviction. They left the club that night changed, though they didn't yet know how. The song had planted a seed, one that would grow into something dangerous, something beautiful. They were 5 women, each carrying a piece of the same forbidden melody, and the world was about to hear it. The next month, the women returned to the Sapphire Lounge, but Lila wasn't there. A new singer, a man with a forgettable voice, took the stage. The absence of Unveiled felt like a betrayal, but the women's bond had deepened. They spoke in code now, their conversations layered with meaning only they understood. Emma had started leaving her ring at home, a small rebellion that felt like shedding a skin. Rachel had begun writing poetry again, words she hid in a locked drawer. Claire had stopped hiding the bruise, letting it fade in plain sight. Sophie laughed louder, bolder, as if daring the world to notice. Maria, though, grew quieter, her eyes always searching the crowd, as if expecting someone to catch them. They didn't know it yet, but their secret was no longer safe. A private investigator, hired by Claire's husband, had followed her to the club. He sat in the shadows, his camera clicking softly, capturing their glances, their touches, their truth. The photos would reach Claire's husband by morning, and the fallout would threaten to tear them apart. But for now, they sat together, their hands brushing under the table, their hearts beating to the rhythm of a song they couldn't forget. They were 5 married women, one forbidden song, and a melody that was only beginning to expose them all. The investigators' photos landed on Claire's kitchen table at dawn, scattered like shrapnel from a bomb. Her husband, David, stood over her, his face a mask of rage and betrayal. "Who are they, Claire?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous. She stared at the images, her hand on Sophie's, Emma's arm brushing Rachel's, Maria's tear-streaked face in the club's dim light. Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Silence was her shield, but it wouldn't hold for long. By noon, the women gathered in Emma's small apartment in Brooklyn, the air heavy with panic. Emma, ever the pragmatist, paced the hardwood floor, her bare ring finger a quiet defiance. "We need a plan," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Rachel sat on the couch, her poetry notebook clutched to her chest like a talisman. Sophie tried to laugh, but it came out brittle, breaking midair. Maria, seated by the window, stared at the street below, as if expecting David to storm in any moment. Claire, still in her coat, stood frozen, the weight of her husband's ultimatum pressing down. Tell him everything, or lose their daughter, Lily. "We can't let him do this," Sophie said, her curls bouncing as she leaned forward. "He's bluffing. He won't take Lily." But Claire shook her head, her bob swaying slightly. "You don't know David. He's not like your husband's. He'll destroy me to keep control." Her voice cracked, and Emma stopped pacing, kneeling beside her. "He can't destroy us," Emma whispered, her hand on Claire's knee. The touch was brief but electric, a reminder of why they risked everything. Rachel opened her notebook, her fingers trembling. "I wrote something last night," she said, her voice soft but resolute. She read aloud, "In shadows we bloom. Where light dares not tread / our hearts sing a truth that the world calls dead." The words hung in the room, a fragile thread connecting them. Maria finally turned from the window, her eyes wet. "We're not shadows," she said. "We're real. And we're not alone." They decided to fight back, but not with fists or lawyers, not yet. They would confront their husbands, one by one, and claim their truth. But first, They needed to find Lila. Her song had started this, and they believed she held the key to their courage. Emma had heard rumors that Lila performed at underground venues, places where people like them could exist without fear. They agreed to search for her, starting with a club in Greenwich Village known for its discretion. That night, they slipped into the Velvet Room, a speakeasy-style bar hidden behind a bookstore. The air was thick with whiskey and defiance. The crowd a mix of artists, rebels, and lovers who didn't fit the world's mold. The women wore plain clothes to blend in, but their eyes betrayed their urgency. Lila wasn't on the bill, but a bartender with a knowing smile pointed them to a back room where a small stage stood empty. "She comes and goes," he said. "Try again tomorrow." Disappointed but undeterred, they sat in a corner, their conversation hushed but intense. Emma proposed they write their own song, a response to Unveiled, something to claim their story. Rachel, the poet, took the lead, scribbling lines on a napkin. Sophie suggested melodies, humming softly, her voice a spark in the dim light. Claire, still shaken, offered a single line, "We break, but we mend, in the love we defend." Maria, ever practical, warned they were running out of time. David's threat loomed, and the others' husbands weren't far behind. Sophie's husband had started asking questions. Rachel's had found her poems. As they left the Velvet Room, a figure watched from the shadows, a woman in her late 20s, with dark eyes and a familiar silhouette. Lila. She'd seen them, heard their whispers, but she didn't approach. Not yet. She knew the weight of their secrets, the danger of their truth. Her song had stirred something unstoppable, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face its consequences. Back at home, Emma lay awake, her thoughts on Rachel. She imagined a world where they could walk hand in hand. No rings, no lies. Rachel, in her own bed across the city, wrote another poem, this one about Emma's eyes, the way they held her like a promise. Claire stared at a photo of Lily, her resolve hardening. She would fight for her daughter, and for herself. Sophie sang softly to herself, a melody taking shape, one that could rival Lila's. Maria prayed, not for forgiveness, but for strength. The investigator, meanwhile, wasn't done. He followed them to the Velvet Room, his camera ready, his client David demanding more proof. The women's rebellion was growing, but so was the net closing around them. They had one more night to find Lila, to find their song, before everything unraveled. The Velvet Room pulsed with a restless energy the next night, its hidden stage now lit with a single bulb casting long shadows. The women returned, their faces taut with hope and dread. They'd spent the day dodging their husbands' suspicions, Emma lying about a late shift, Rachel claiming a book club meeting, Claire citing a parent-teacher conference. Sophie had laughed off her husband's questions with a charm that felt increasingly hollow, while Maria had simply left a note, gone to pray. They were running out of lies, and the truth was a fire they could no longer contain. They found seats near the stage, their eyes scanning for Lila. The bartender from the previous night nodded at them, slipping a folded note under Emma's glass. It read, "She's here." Wait. Emma's pulse quickened as she passed the note to Rachel, their fingers lingering a moment too long. Claire clutched her scarf, her bruise now faded but the memory of David's grip still vivid. Sophie hummed their half-written song under her breath, her curls catching the light. Maria sat still, her hands folded, but her eyes burned with a quiet fury. When Lila appeared, the room seemed to hold its breath. She wore a simple black dress, her dark hair loose, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked on the 5 women. The guitar in her hands was worn, its strings gleaming under the bulb. "This is for the ones who hide," she said, her voice low, almost a challenge. Then she began Unveiled again. But this time, the lyrics felt sharper, more personal, as if she'd rewritten them for this moment. In silence we burn. In shadows we fight, /for love that dares to claim the light. The women felt the words like a pulse, each note stripping away another layer of their fear. Emma reached for Rachel's hand openly now, no longer caring who saw. Rachel's breath caught, her poetry notebook forgotten on the table. Claire's scarf fell to the floor, and she let it stay, her shoulders squaring as if ready for battle. Sophie sang along softly, her voice blending with Lila's, their song taking shape. Maria whispered, "This is it." And for the first time, her voice held no doubt. After the song, Lila stepped off the stage and approached their table. Up close, she was younger than they'd thought, barely 28, with a weariness that belied her age. "You're the ones," she said, not a question. "I saw you last month." "My song, it's yours, isn't it?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Rachel found her voice first. "It's ours. But we need more. We need to fight." Lila sat with them, her presence both calming and electric. She told them her story, a love lost to fear, a woman she'd loved who chose safety over truth. Unveiled was her rebellion, her way of keeping that love alive. "You're braver than I was," she said, her eyes on Claire's bare neck, Sophie's restless hands, Maria's steady gaze. "But you're not safe. Not yet." She agreed to help them finish their song, a new version of Unveiled that would be theirs alone. They worked through the night, Rachel's poetry weaving with Sophie's melodies, Lila's guitar grounding them. Claire added lyrics about freedom, about choosing love over fear. Emma spoke of courage, her voice steady as she described a world where they could be free. Maria, silent at first, finally offered a line, "We rise. We fall. But we love through it all." By dawn, the song was complete, a raw, aching anthem they called ours. It was more than music, it was their declaration, their shield, their weapon. Lila promised to perform it at the Velvet Room's next secret show, a gathering for those who lived in the margins. But as they left, the investigator's camera clicked again, hidden in the alley. David had doubled his payment, demanding names, proof, everything. The photos now showed Lila with them, her face clear in the morning light. Back home, the women faced their lives with new resolve. Emma told her husband, Mark, she was leaving, her voice calm but unyielding. He shouted, pleaded, but she packed a bag and left for Rachel's. Rachel's husband found her poems and burned them, but she wrote new ones, bolder, on the walls of their guest room. Claire faced David, her voice steady as she demanded joint custody of Lily. He laughed, but she saw fear in his eyes. She was no longer the woman he could control. Sophie sang "Ours" to her husband, her voice a challenge he couldn't meet. Maria told her daughter the truth, expecting rejection, but found only love. The investigator's photos reached David that night, and he made a call. Not to a lawyer, but to a local preacher known for his fire and brimstone sermons. The women's song was about to face a bigger stage, and the consequences would be louder than any of them expected. The preacher's voice boomed through the small church in Queens, his sermon a venomous warning about sinners hiding in plain sight. David sat in the front pew, his jaw tight, the investigator's photos tucked into his coat. Claire's absence burned in him, but he wasn't done. He'd shared the photos with the preacher, who saw in them a chance to rally his flock against what he called moral decay. The women didn't know it yet, but their secret was no longer theirs alone. Emma and Rachel woke tangled in each other's arms in Rachel's guest room, the morning light soft on their faces. For the first time, Emma felt no guilt, only a fierce joy that scared her with its intensity. Rachel traced her cheek, whispering lines from ours. We rise. We fall. But we love through it all. They knew Mark and Rachel's husband were plotting something, phone calls late at night. Hushed voices, but they refused to hide. They dressed and headed to the velvet room, where Sophie, Claire, and Maria were already waiting. The club was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Lila had spread word of the secret show, and the crowd was a mix of rebels, lovers, and outcasts, all drawn to the promise of a song that spoke their truth. The women sat at their usual table, but tonight they felt exposed, their courage tested by the weight of unseen eyes. Sophie's laughter was quieter, her curls pinned back as if to signal seriousness. Claire's hands shook, but she held Lily's photo tight, a reminder of why she fought. Maria's prayers had shifted. She no longer asked for strength, but for forgiveness. Not for herself, but for those who would judge them. Lila took the stage, her guitar slung low, her eyes finding the women's table. "This is for the brave," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. She began ours, the melody raw and unpolished, Rachel's poetry woven into every line. The crowd leaned in, some swaying, others weeping, as the song named their struggles, their loves, their defiance. Emma gripped Rachel's hand, Claire leaned into Sophie, and Maria closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. But the preacher's flock had infiltrated the crowd. A man in a dark suit stood at the back, his face grim, whispering to others who nodded, their eyes on the women. The investigator was there too, his camera hidden but active. David had tipped them off, and they were ready to act. As Lila's voice soared, the man in the suit stood, shouting, "This is sin. You're all damned." The room froze, the music halting mid-note. Lila didn't flinch. "Sit down," she said, her voice calm but steel sharp. "Or leave." The crowd murmured, some cheering, others shifting uncomfortably. The women stood, their hands linked, a silent vow. Emma spoke first, her voice carrying over the noise. "We're not ashamed. We're here, and we're real." Rachel stepped forward, reciting her poetry aloud, her words a shield. Claire raised Lily's photo, her voice breaking but firm. "I'm a mother, and I'm enough." Sophie sang a line from ours, her voice clear and defiant. Maria, last, said simply, "God sees us. All of us." The man in the suit lunged forward, but the crowd pushed back, a wall of bodies protecting the stage. Lila started playing again, louder, fiercer, and the room erupted in applause. The intruders left, outnumbered, but the women knew this was only the beginning. The preacher would spread the word, and their husbands would tighten their grip. David, especially, was a storm waiting to break. They left the club under cover of night, Lila walking with them. She told them of a safe house in upstate New York, a place where women like them could start over. It was a risk leaving their lives, their children, their pasts, but the alternative was suffocation. Emma thought of her son, Ben, and wondered if he'd understand. Rachel imagined a life where her poems weren't hidden. Claire clung to the hope of keeping Lily. Sophie dreamed of singing freely, and Maria prayed her daughter would follow her. By morning, the preacher's sermon had hit the local papers, naming the Sapphire Lounge as a den of vice. The women's names weren't printed yet, but whispers were spreading. David called Claire, his voice cold, "Come home, or I'll make sure everyone knows." Emma's husband left a voicemail, threatening to cut her off. Rachel's found her new poems and tore them apart. Sophie's husband locked her out, and Maria's daughter called, crying, asking why she hadn't told her sooner. The women met at the safe house, a small cabin surrounded by pines. Lila was there, her guitar a quiet promise. They had one more performance, one more chance to sing, hours before the world closed in. But the investigator was already on his way, and the preacher's flock wasn't far behind. The safe house smelled of pine and old books, its wooden walls a fragile shield against the storm brewing outside. The women sat in a circle on the floor, their bags packed but their hearts heavy. Lila strummed her guitar softly, the notes of hours filling the small space like a prayer. Emma's eyes were red from arguing with Mark over the phone. He threatened to take Ben if she didn't return. Rachel's hands shook as she clutched a new poem, written in the car on the way up, her husband's threats echoing in her mind. Claire held Lily's photo, her thumb tracing her daughter's smile. David's ultimatum had escalated. He'd hired a lawyer, claiming she was unfit. Sophie's laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet determination snuck out with nothing but her voice and a single change of clothes. Maria sat apart, her daughter's tearful call replaying in her head. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom?" she'd asked, and Maria had no answer, only guilt. Lila stopped playing, her dark eyes scanning their faces. "You can't go back," she said. "Not now. They know too much." She'd seen the preacher's article in the paper, the photos circulating in church bulletins. The investigator had sold duplicates to Sophie's husband, who was now rallying the others. The women were no longer just a secret, they were a scandal. Emma stood, pacing the creaky floor. "We need to perform ours again. Somewhere public, somewhere they can't ignore us." Rachel nodded, her voice soft but fierce. "We'll sing it for everyone who's ever had to hide." Claire looked up, her eyes blazing. "For Lily. So she knows her mother fought for her." Sophie hummed the melody, her curls loose again, a spark of her old fire returning. Maria whispered, "For my daughter, too. So she's proud of me." They planned a performance in Washington Square Park, a bold move in the heart of the city. Lila knew a group of musicians who'd join them, amplifying their voices. The park was a haven for free spirits, but it was also a stage where their enemies could find them. They agreed to risk if fighting had only brought them pain. Rachel wrote a new verse for ours, one that named their fear but also their hope. "We stand in the light, though the shadows still call / our love is our strength, and we'll rise through the fall." The day of the performance was crisp, the park alive with students, artists, and tourists. The women set up near the arch, their nerves raw but their resolve unbreakable. Lila led the musicians, her guitar a steady anchor. Emma wore no ring, her hand in Rachel's, their love a quiet rebellion. Claire held a sign that read, "For Lily," her scarf gone, her bruise a fading memory. Sophie's voice carried the melody, strong and clear, drawing a crowd. Maria stood tall, her daughter's name on her lips, a prayer and a promise. As they sang, the crowd grew, some cheering, others whispering. Ours rang out, its lyrics a beacon for those who'd ever felt unseen. A young woman in the crowd wiped tears, holding her girlfriend's hand. An older man nodded, his eyes distant, as if remembering a love he'd lost. But not everyone was moved. The preacher's flock appeared, their signs harsh, repent or burn. The investigator was there, too, his camera flashing, David's money in his pocket. Emma saw him first and froze mid-verse. Rachel squeezed her hand, urging her to keep singing. Claire stepped forward, her voice joining Sophie's, louder now, defiant. Miah raised her chin, her eyes locking with the protesters, her silence more powerful than their shouts. The crowd pushed back against the flock, forming a protective ring around the women. Lila's guitar never faltered, her voice a steady guide. The police arrived, called by the preacher's group, but the crowd's cheers drowned out their complaints. The women finished ours, their voices blending into a single, unbreakable note. For a moment, they were free not just from their husbands, but from the weight of the world's judgment. The crowd roared, and strangers embraced them, thanking them for their courage. But freedom came at a cost. By nightfall, David had filed for full custody, citing Claire's immoral behavior. Mark had locked Emma out of their house, Ben's toys still inside. Rachel's husband had trashed her study, her poems scattered like ash. Sophie's husband had frozen her accounts, leaving her with nothing. Maria's daughter had stopped answering her calls, the silence louder than any sermon. They returned to the safe house, their victory bittersweet. Lila stayed with them, her presence a reminder that they weren't alone. They had their song, their truth, and each other. But the investigators' photos were spreading, and the preacher's sermon was gaining traction. The women knew they had one more fight left, one that would test their love, their courage, and the melody that had exposed them all. The safe house felt smaller now, its walls closing in as the women faced the fallout of their park performance. The newspapers had picked up the story, with headlines screaming, "Scandal in the Square." The preacher's flock had turned their song into a rallying cry for hate, plastering the women's faces blurred but recognizable across flyers in churches and diners. Emma's phone buzzed with messages from neighbors, some supportive, others vicious. Rachel's poetry, once her sanctuary, was now quoted out of context in sermons, twisted into something ugly. Claire sat by the window, Lily's photo pressed to her chest. David's lawyer had sent papers demanding she surrender custody by week's end. "He's using the photos," she said, her voice hollow. "He says I'm a danger to her." Sophie, pacing, kicked a chair. "They can't take her. We'll fight this." Her own husband had cut her off completely, leaving her with only the clothes she wore and her voice, which still carried hours. Miah stared at her hands, her daughter's silence a wound that wouldn't heal. "I thought she'd understand," she whispered. Emma and Rachel sat close, their hands entwined, but even their love felt fragile under the weight of the world's judgment. Lila, ever the anchor, suggested a new plan, a final performance, not in a park or a club, but on a bigger stage, a community radio station in Brooklyn that championed outcasts. The station's host, a woman named June who'd faced her own battles, had heard ours and offered them airtime. "You can reach thousands," Lila said. "Let them hear your truth, not the preacher's lies." The women hesitated. A radio broadcast would expose them, no more hiding, no more half-truths. But they'd come too far to turn back. They spent the day preparing, refining hours with new verses that spoke of their children, their fears, their unbreakable bond. Rachel wrote, "For our daughters, our sons, we sing through the pain / our love is the fire that no storm can contain." Sophie added a harmony, her voice raw but steady. Claire poured her heart into a line about Lily, "My child is my light, and I'll fight for her name." Emma and Miah wove in their own truths, their voices blending into something fierce and whole. The radio station was a cramped space filled with old vinyls and flickering lights, but June's warmth made it feel like home. She greeted them with hugs, her eyes bright with admiration. "You're changing things," she said. "People need to hear this." As they set up, the women felt the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just a song, it was a confession. A challenge. A plea for the world to see them as they were. The broadcast began at midnight. The city's insomniacs and rebels tuning in. Lila introduced them. Her voice steady. These are 5 women who dared to love, to live, to sing. This is ours. The music flowed, their voices rising over the airwaves, reaching apartments, cars, and hearts across New York. Listeners called in, some with tears, others with anger, but the women kept singing, their truth too loud to silence. Halfway through, the station's phone rang off the hook. June whispered, "It's David. He's threatening to sue." Claire's face paled, but she sang louder, her voice a defiance he couldn't touch. Emma thought of Ben, hoping he'd hear this one day and know his mother was brave. Rachel's poetry filled the air, each word a brick in the wall they were building. Sophie's harmony soared, and Maria's quiet strength anchored them all. But the preacher's flock was listening too. They gathered outside the station, their signs uglier now, their voices louder. The investigator was among them, his camera replaced by a notebook, scribbling names to feed to David and the others. The women finished ours, and June opened the lines for callers. A young woman spoke first, her voice trembling. "You gave me hope. I'm not alone anymore." An older man followed, his words gruff but kind. "My sister loved like you. I wish I'd stood by her." Then David's voice came through, cold and sharp. "Claire, stop this. You're ruining our daughter." The room froze, but Claire took the mic. "I'm saving her, David, so she can be free." The line went dead, and the crowd outside grew louder, banging on the station's door. June locked it, but the women knew they couldn't stay. They thanked her, their eyes wet, and slipped out the back, Lila leading them to a van she'd borrowed. They drove through the night, the city's lights blurring past. The broadcast had changed everything. Strangers were rallying for them, but so were their enemies. They had one more place to go, one more fight to win, and a melody that was now bigger than them all. The van rumbled through the pre-dawn streets, its tires humming a tense rhythm as the women sat in silence, their hands clasped tightly. Lila drove, her eyes fixed on the road, heading for a community center in Harlem where a group of activists had offered them shelter. The radio broadcast had lit a spark. Posts on X were buzzing with clips of ours, some calling it a revolution, others a sin. Emma scrolled through her phone, reading messages of support mixed with hate. "We're trending," she said, her voice a mix of awe and fear. Rachel leaned against her, her poetry notebook open but untouched, her heart too full for words. Claire clutched Lily's photo, her resolve hardening with every mile. David's voice on the radio had shaken her, but it also freed her. She'd spoken her truth, and the world had heard. Sophie hummed softly, her curls damp with sweat, her voice a quiet anchor. Maria prayed silently, not for forgiveness now, but for her daughter to understand. The weight of their exposure was crushing, but so was the hope that they'd ignited something bigger. The community center was a brick building with faded murals, its doors opened by a woman named Aisha, a queer activist who'd heard their broadcast. "You're safe here," she said, her smile warm but fierce. She led them to a basement room filled with blankets and donated clothes, a makeshift haven for those on the run. Aisha had already organized a vigil for the women, set for the next evening, where supporters would sing hours in solidarity. "You've started something," she told them. "People are listening." But safety was fleeting. The preacher's flock had tracked them, their flyers now naming the women explicitly, their faces no longer blurred. David had leaked Claire's name to the press, and the others' husbands followed suit, painting them as deviants who'd abandoned their families. Emma's son, Ben, was with her sister now, safe but confused. Rachel's husband had locked her out of their home, her poems confiscated as evidence. Sophie's bank cards were useless, and Maria's daughter had texted a single word, "Why?" They spent the day planning the vigil, their voices hoarse but determined. Lila taught them how to harmonize better, her guitar a steady guide. Rachel added a final verse to ours, "Our truth is our home. Though the world may deny / we'll sing till the stars light the truth in the sky." Claire spoke of Lily, vowing to fight for custody in court. Sophie laughed for the first time in days, her voice bright as she imagined singing for thousands. Maria called her daughter, leaving a voicemail that poured out her heart. "I'm your mother, and I love you. I'm fighting for us." The vigil was held in a small park near the center, lit by candles and defiance. Hundreds gathered: queer youth, allies, strangers moved by the broadcast. The women stood on a makeshift stage, Lila at their side, their voices rising as they sang ours. The crowd joined in, their voices a chorus that drowned out the distant shouts of the preacher's flock. A young man held a sign, "Love is love." A mother wept, clutching her son, whispering, "You gave us courage." But the flock arrived, led by the preacher himself, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "Repent," he shouted, his followers waving signs that stung like knives. The investigator was there, too, his notebook filled with names, ready to hand over to David and the others. The police hovered at the edges, unsure whether to intervene. Emma stepped forward, her voice clear over the chaos. "We're not here to fight you. We're here to live." Rachel recited her poetry, her words cutting through the hate. Claire held up Lily's photo, her voice breaking, "This is for my daughter." Sophie sang louder, her harmony a challenge. Maria, silent, raised her hand, a gesture of peace that silenced the crowd for a moment. The vigil ended with the crowd linking arms, protecting the women as they left. Aisha drove them to a new safe house, this one in the Bronx, promising to connect them with lawyers and activists. The women were exhausted but unbroken, their song now a beacon for others. They slept in shifts, their dreams filled with music and fear. By morning, the news had spread further. A national outlet picked up their story, calling them the Five Who Sang. Support poured in: donations, letters, offers of help. But so did the threats. David's lawyer filed an emergency motion, claiming Claire was a flight risk. The other husbands were closing ranks, hiring their own investigators. The women knew their time was running out, but they had one final act of performance that would either save them or break them for good. The new safe house in the Bronx was a cramped apartment above a bodega, its windows boarded up, the air thick with the scent of coffee and courage. The women gathered around a small radio, listening to their stories spread across the airwaves. The Five Who Sang was now a movement. Their song, Ours, shared on X, sung in vigils from San Francisco to Boston. But the cost was steep. Claire's court date for Lily's custody was tomorrow, and David's lawyer had new photos, ones from the vigil, showing her with Sophie, their hands linked. Emma's sister had texted, Ben was asking for her, but Mark was blocking access. Rachel's poems were now evidence in her husband's divorce filing, accusing her of abandonment. Sophie's voice was her only asset, her accounts still frozen. Maria's daughter had finally called back, her voice soft but firm. "I love you, Mom, but I need time." Lila sat with them, her guitar quiet for once. "You've changed the world," she said, her eyes heavy with the weight of their fight. "But it's not over. You need one more stage." Aisha, their ally, had secured a slot at a national music festival in Central Park, a platform that could reach millions. It was their last chance to sing hours before the courts. The preachers and their husbands tried to silence them for good. The women agreed, their fear matched only by their resolve. They spent the day rehearsing, their voices raw but powerful. Rachel's final verse was complete. We sing for the lost, for the found, for the free. Our love is the song that will always be. Sophie added a soaring bridge, her curls bouncing as she sang. Claire wrote a line for Lily, her voice steady. My heart is your home, wherever I stand. Emma and Maria harmonized, their voices a testament to their bond. Lila coached them, her own story woven into every note. Tesh lost her love, but she'd found purpose in theirs. The festival was a sea of color and sound. Thousands gathered under the autumn sky. The women took the stage, their plain clothes a stark contrast to the vibrant crowd. Lila introduced them, her voice clear. These are 5 women who dared to love. This is their song. As hours began, the crowd fell silent, then erupted, some singing along, others recording, their phones lighting up the park. Emma held Rachel's hand, their love a beacon. Claire held Lily's photo aloft, her voice unbroken. Sophie's harmony soared, and Maria's quiet strength anchored them. The music was their truth, their defiance, their hope. The preacher's flock was there, smaller now, their signs ignored by the crowd. The investigator watched, his notebook useless against the thousands who cheered. David was in the audience, his face unreadable, but Claire met his gaze and sang louder. The other husbands were absent, their threats distant for now. The women finished ours, and the crowd roared, strangers embracing them, thanking them for their courage. The aftermath was chaos and clarity. Claire's court date came, and the judge, moved by the public outcry, granted her joint custody of Lily. David's threats crumbled under the weight of her truth. Emma reunited with Ben, her sister smuggling him to the safe house, his small arms around her neck. Rachel's husband dropped the divorce, unable to fight the tide of support, but she left anyway, her poems now published in a local zine. Sophie's voice caught the ear of a producer, who offered her a recording deal. Maria's daughter arrived at the safe house, tears in her eyes, and hugged her mother, whispering, I'm proud of you. The women stood together one last time, in the park where it all began, Lila's guitar playing softly. They'd lost homes, husbands, and safety, but they'd gained something greater, each other, their song, and a world that was starting to listen. Ours wasn't just their melody, it was a call to others, a promise that love could endure, could triumph, could change everything. As they walked away, the city buzzing around them, they knew the fight wasn't over. The preacher's flock would regroup, the investigators would lurk, but the women were no longer afraid. They had their song, their truth, and a melody that had exposed them all not to shame, but to freedom. They were 5 married women, one forbidden song, and a legacy that would echo for years to come.